bonjour, guten tag, hola, salve, konnichiwa, and welcome once again to another door on the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2021. Just a couple of days now until the big event itself. And surely at the North Pole, Santa Claus is busy packing his sleigh and getting ready to move off from his deployment point. Deployment points, of course, are at the heart of TooFatLardies War Games. And here we're going to listen to Richard as he tells us about his inspiration behind deployment points and just what they add to the games that he designs. Richard, over to you.
Throughout this series of inspiration-themed Advent calendar windows, all three of us have talked a lot about journeys, and this window's no different. When we first sat around that Vietnam gaming table that I mentioned, for what turned out to be our first impromptu workshop session, one of the things in our shopping list of wants for the set of War Games rules that we wanted to play was hidden deployment, a movement that didn't include sketching stuff on scrappy bits of paper. We'd played lots of games before where the players were obliged to draw a scale map and then mark their hidden movement on it. And if I'm honest, it felt particularly clunky, and it was also a bit too loose. The scale maps were not, of course, to scale. They were scrappy bits of paper with people drawing them on them with an old biro or whatever could be found in the cupboard at the club. And where you were or were not was something of, possibly a lottery, but it often seemed to be the case that many players were exactly where they needed to be at exactly the right time to be there. Now, our first solution to this was to use the system of blinds that you see in I Ain't Been Shot Mum and Charlie Don't Surf, and actually the first edition of Sharp Practice. The basic premise was that, in I Ain't Been Shot Mum, for example, if the player had 5 units, let's say 3 platoons of infantry, a platoon of tanks, and maybe a platoon of anti-tank guns, they'd probably get 8 blinds. As they moved these around the table, they could be spotted by the enemy when they became visible. But the key thing was that while the troops were cloaked on your blind, your opponent was never sure which blinds represented which real units, and which blinds were actually dummies containing nothing at all, or possibly just small patrols. Blinds were important in that using them was a bit of a game in itself. You could use them to patrol, scouting out enemy positions, because dummy blinds, like real troops, could spot other blinds. You could suggest a build-up of forces in one area when in truth your main attack was going to be launched somewhere else. Blinds moved faster, so you could use them to keep troops in reserve who could then be rapidly moved forwards to where they were needed. I liked the mechanism, and so did many others. Certainly some of the earliest converts to Lardy Games rules were people who were playing I Ain't Been Shot Mum using precisely those blinds. It certainly removed maps. It removed, introduced an element of uncertainty, but it removed that element of doubt as to where hidden troops had got to when they deployed, because they deployed underneath the blind. And it also presented a tactical game within a game, which has always appealed to me, and that's something you'll see in quite a lot of our rule sets. It may be a comment on where wargaming was generally 20 years ago to say that they were not particularly popular. We had lots of feedback about people not liking the cardboard counters that we were using, as they were a bit of an eyesore. I mean, actually, we tended to print out various national flags so that they weren't too ugly. I mean, in I Ain't Been Shot Mum, they were ovals, which had standard NATO tactical symbols on them. There were 3 dots for a platoon and that oval shape. So to my mind, they looked like, and they were certainly intended to look like, an officer's operations map with potential enemy locations marked on them. Nevertheless, the feedback that we kept getting was that they weren't popular. And we steadfastly ignored that for many years. But when I came to design Chain of Command, I decided to try to rethink we handled this issue. I kept exactly the same objectives. I wanted the hidden movement, I wanted no maps, I still wanted that game within a game where you could outthink your opponent, and I wanted them to be flexible enough that you could move reserves forward quite rapidly and change the situation quite dramatically. I wanted that degree of uncertainty as to where your enemy was and what they were doing. However, I definitely wanted to remove the cardboard counters that people said they didn't like. And the answer was, after a degree of trial and error, the answer was the patrol phase and the jump-off points, which I hope does what blinds used to do, but in a slightly more granular fashion, as befits a smaller platoon-sized game rather than the company-sized game in I Ain't Been Shot, Mum, and Charlie Don't Serve. The first thing I did actually was to make some pretty jump-off points so there could be no question about cardboard counters. These had to look good and enhance the table rather than detract from it. I know the first ones I did, I used 1/48 scale Tamiya oil drums and sort of jerry cans and bits of scatter, which I mounted on some large washers about 30 mil, no, a bit bigger than that, let's say a couple of inches across. Anyway, later we got the well-known sculptor Richard Ansell to sculpt us some, which we had cast in resin. And there's no doubt that they look good. I mean, I see them being used as just general scenery pieces on some people's gaming tables. And I think that's certainly got around the issue of the ugly blinds. What's more important is I think that the patrol phase provides that pre-game recce phase. And it does provide you with some intel on where the enemy are, but it's imperfect. So a jump-off point in an orchard is telling you that half an hour ago, before the action started, your patrols told you that the enemy were identified at that location. When you combine all three of the enemy jump-off points, it gives you an indication of where the enemy forward line is, but without any absolute certainty. You don't know whether they're going to be still in those places. You don't know if they're going to be deploying from one, two, or all three of them. And what's also key is that the jump-off points can be moved using the chain of command dice. So we retain the ability that we had with blinds to literally change the shape of the action very dramatically if it's played effectively. Even when 90% of your force is not deployed onto the table, it's possible to push forward with a small patrol and then consolidate by leaping forward the jump-off point and then deploying your force onto that. So it very much allows players to develop their own relatively sophisticated plans. Now, whether they come off or not is another matter. With sharp practice and infamy, we took the idea along a slightly different route. To a degree, it was more traditional with fixed deployment points and zones, which almost represented that sort of fixed table edge point. However, the addition of the movable deployment point in sharp practice was actually a return to the original blinds concept. What was different was that the units deployed from the deployment zones, deployment points, movable deployment points, and not directly onto them. This means that a deployment point, like a jump-off point, represents the general area of the threat, but not its precise location. Now, interestingly, by making these points small and round and encouraging people to model a small vignette on them, we seem to have avoided all the negative comments that blinds received, even though it's pretty much exactly the same mechanism. Indeed, when we went to the movable deployment point with sharp practice, I was very aware of the fact that I felt we were taking a risk in going back to that, what is effectively a blind. However, I think, as I mentioned earlier, in 2016, when we produced the current version of sharp practice, things had moved on in the hobby in the years between 2002 and then. I mean, in 2002, ideas such as friction and hidden threats and of the empty battlefield were viewed as dangerously edgy to downright heretical at best, to complete and utter nonsense at worst. I mean, in the beginning, we found that the issue was not whether people enjoyed the games we were producing, but whether they'd even play them, because it was taking them too far from what they were used to. By 2016, that had changed. Most games now, in 2021, will involve some kind of friction, uncertainty, unpredictability. It's by no means odd for games now to have a system where you're not going to move all of your units in a turn. It's been fun over the years to see gamers taking all of these variations on the themes that we've created. And infamy with ambush points, we took the concept round the block once again. In some ways, the idea of the 6 ambush points when the Romans are fighting in barbarian territory harks back to those 8 blinds in I Ain't Been Shot Mum that we were talking about, with so many potential threats. Every one of them represents danger. And again, we return to the principle that you know the general area of the threat, but not the precise location. As we go forwards, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel each time, but what we do seem to do is develop a different type of wheel, which I guess isn't a bad thing. It's quite interesting to see gamers using the different concepts when they're developing their own rule ideas for different periods. And I've just been editing the latest Lard magazine, and it's interesting to see gamers mixing and matching the mechanisms from different games to achieve what they want to achieve. Well, it's been a journey. I say that we no longer get complaints that we used to have about blinds. It's not true. Not entirely true anyway. We do get the occasional comment from people who say that they painted their troops and they want to get them on the table from the very start of the game. They don't want hidden movement. They don't want their chance to keep troops unseen in reserve. They just want to get everything on the board. And frankly, that's perfectly fine. You just go and play another game. I no longer have the patience or the energy really to debate the issue, because I tend to find that gamers who've got that mindset that they want to line their troops up and have a more traditional game are very, very comfortable with that idea, and I'm totally cool with that as well. These are Wargames rules, not tablets of stone. Part of the fun of wargaming is finding the game that we enjoy and want to play. And hopefully what we've done so far with jump off points, blinds, deployment points, deployment zones, ambush points is adding to the general body of tools in the box that we can use going forwards.